Good evening, everybody. What a great crowd we have tonight. I'm Jim Holmberg. I'm the Filson Historical Society Curator. Thank you for joining us both in person and virtually for tonight's program. Before we begin, I want to take a moment to thank the sponsors of tonight's event, Kentucky Waterways Alliance and Payne Hollow on the Ohio. Susan Griffin Ward is here representing both of these prestigious organizations, and she would like to share some remarks. Susan?
Thank you, Jim. I'm honored to be here this evening on behalf of Kentucky Waterways Alliance, where I serve as the Director of Community Engagement. KWA, as we are often called, is celebrating the 30th anniversary of our founding this year. Since 1993, our members and partners have worked together to protect, restore, and celebrate Kentucky's 90,000 miles of lakes, rivers, and streams. This includes the Ohio River that flows for 664 miles along the Kentucky shore. The Ohio River is metaphorically and geographically the heart of our country. When we protect the river, we also protect our people, our communities, and wildlife. It's all interconnected. We are in this together. Mr. Rinker's book celebrates and deepens our understanding of this great and beautiful river, highlighting the importance of its past and future. I'm also here as a supporter of Payne Hollow on the Ohio, a new nonprofit dedicated to one of my very favorite places on the earth. It is appropriate that Payne Hollow on the Ohio is also a sponsor of this evening's event. Mr. Buck's book was, in part, inspired by Anna and Harlan Hubbard and their Shanty Boat adventure down the Ohio and Mississippi rivers. Payne Hollow is in Trimble County on the banks of the Ohio, and it was a place where the Hubbards made their home after their epic adventure. Following its restoration, Payne Hollow on the Ohio is envisioned to be a source of artistic and environmental residencies and workshops. Tomorrow, Rinker Buck and several others are paddling a canoe to visit Payne Hollow. I think Anna and Harlan would approve. Thank you for coming tonight.
Now it's my pleasure to introduce tonight's speaker. Rinker Buck began his career in journalism at the Berkshire Eagle and was a longtime staff writer for the Hartford Courant. He has written for Vanity Fair, New York, Life, and many other publications, and his work has won the Penn New England Award, the Eugene S. Pulliam National Journalism Writing Award, and the Society of Professional Journalists Sigma Delta Chi Award. He is the New York Times bestselling author of The Oregon Trail, Flight of Passage, and First Job. In Life on the Mississippi, Mr. Buck navigated the Ohio and Mississippi from Pittsburgh to New Orleans in his flatboat Patience. Ben McGrath of the New York Times wrote that, "You might say that Buck is a reenactor by another name, a travel writer who delights in incongruity and in history's rhymes, and that his perch atop the Patience cabin was the perfect vantage both for admiring the landscape of conservation forest punctuated by Rust Belt blight and for contemplating the economic winds that have lately roiled our politics." Having read both Oregon Trail and Life on the Mississippi, I can tell you that for those who enjoy reading about adventurers who travel historical routes and chronicle not only their experiences, but the history of the country and people journeyed through, both books are excellent reads. Mr. Buck ends Oregon Trail with this wonderful and I think very true belief. Crazy ass passion is a staple of life and persistence its nourishing source. Without them, you cannot cross the trail. It was true when he traveled the Oregon Trail, and it was true when he sailed down the Ohio and Mississippi rivers. Please join me in welcoming Rinker Buck.
Well, thank you, Jim, and I'm really glad to be here in Louisville, where we sailed through so many summers ago. But I have to start out by apologizing. I'm sorry, everyone. At least 15 people have come up to me tonight and said, "Well, I'm reading your book, and first you in Cincinnati, and then you in Brandenburg, Kentucky." And you spent a lot of time in Brandenburg, Kentucky, writing about it. And we know you had to have gone through to get from that point to the other point. And but we're not there. So I'm sorry. What I'm going to talk about tonight, what makes a book and what makes an adventure and so forth. But what happens is when you structure the book is much more important than the experience that you're writing about. Excuse me. The book really is the testament, the evidence that remains behind, and then you want people to always read about, which is much more important than your just temporal journey on the river. So you have to make each incident count, and you have to always pick a narrative that starts a chapter and so forth with something that actually moves the story along. So what happened in Louisville is I had this reenactor guy along. Somebody helped me build a boat, suggested this guy, and he was a reenactor who had played Meriwether Lewis during the bicentennial Lewis and Clark celebration. And he was, I don't have many good things to say about reenactors in my book. You have to read it to see that. But I think Louisville was the night when we got here, and this pain in the neck guy who fortunately very soon after left the boat, he's playing Meriwether Lewis, who went from here all the way across the mountains and back. And the one big problem, and he's a reenactor and he's got the hat on and all this stuff, But the one problem he got whenever we landed on land, was, can somebody please go up the banks and find me a clean bathroom so I can use the bathroom, and so, that just epitomized to me what reenactors are, he needs a clean place to relieve himself. And he's Meriwether Lewis, so. I will tell you tonight, we're going to share a little bit about what is a book and how are they made, but, and my river trip. But one thing is I don't read from the book, okay? And that started when my editor on this book and book before said, don't go to an audience and read your book. It's really boring, right? Writers are really boring when they read their books. And I thought about it myself, and I happen to live in an area of New England where lots of writers live and stuff. And I've gone to all these readings. I'm not going to name the famous writers and everything, but they're really quite boring. They read from their book and they think, I'm so brilliant. And, I've been on the bestseller list and all this, And then they start reading this thing and it's like, oh, listen to what I wrote about here. And it's terrible. So just after my editor said that, I was up in Maine, and a very famous short story writer and novelist who I admired quite a bit when I was younger and just starting out in New York, has a summer place nearby, and a local bookstore invited her over, and I went there. I was very excited to see her because she'd been someone I looked forward to when I was a young man, and I got there. And she reads from this short story, her short story. And it's really a boring short story. It's about a couple, older couple living on the coast of Maine, reminiscing about how much fun they had when their children were still there, but their children aren't there anymore. So it's not as much fun, it's like, and so I fell asleep. I fell asleep in the middle of her talk. And then afterwards, my mother was a big reader, and she would really like a signed book by this person. And the bookstore is owned by friends of mine. I really wanted to support the bookstore. So I bought a copy of her book and I took it over and I said, hello, Ms. So-and-so. I've wanted to meet you since I was a young man. I've been reading you for years. And she says, oh, well, great. I'm very pleased to meet you now that you're awake. Yeah. So it was embarrassing. So I don't want to put anybody in that situation. But what I'm going to do tonight is talk about how is a book put together, and what's the agenda of the book, and what happens to be what's going on in the mind of the writer when these start. So here we go. So that's obviously a map of the eastern and central part of the country. And what happened was, with a prior book in all this area west of the Mississippi, I bought a team of mules and bought an old restored 1883 Peter Shuttler wagon. And my brother and I just set off one day and we rode the Oregon Trail, the whole trail. And I envisioned the covered wagon as an observatory of the frontier country, not reenactment, like people would say, "Where's your period dress? Where's your period dress?" And my brother Nick, who as you know, was quite a character, he said, "Ma'am, I gave up that period dress when I went through menopause. All right." So, but the big thing about the trip across the Oregon Trail was the rivers. The Oregon Trail follows for 2,000 miles, the great river valleys of the West, the Platte to the Sweetwater, and the Platte delivers you right to the Sweetwater to there's a couple ones in between there, but to the Snake, and the Snake to the Columbia. So crossing the plains was really quite a bit about the rivers, and the pioneers became extremely adroit at putting logs between their wagons or pushing the wagons across on ferries that they made on the spot and everything. And I just couldn't get over how skilled they were at the rivers, because we think of the plains as crossing the plains with the dusts and the oxen and the Indian tribes and everything else. So I finally found an answer to my question when I got to a place called the Dalles in Eastern Oregon, which is a lovely town overlooking the Columbia River. And it was about 300 miles shy of the Willamette Valley on the Pacific coast where the pioneers were going. And they looked up and they saw the last range of mountains, which was the Cascades. And most of them realized, wow, we're not going to get across there with these wagons. About a third of the wagons didn't make it all the way to California or Oregon. And they stopped, most of them stopped at the Dalles along the Columbia River, where a thriving industry had been built up, taking the wagons apart, because by then they were all battered and wheels had fallen off and everything. And there was a thriving local industry taking the wagons apart, building a flatboat out of it. And then the pioneers would continue down to Oregon City on a reconstituted wagon that was now a boat. And curious about this, I pursued a research method that I often use, which I went to a local library and I saw if in the historical room, did they have any accounts of the river at that time? And I found two original unpublished accounts. I was probably the first person to look at them in many years. And the fellows were in their 80s, late in the 19th century, they were in their 80s, and they're looking back when they were in their 40s and 50s, converting covered wagons to boats. And one line I just really struck me and started me on my new book, which is the pioneers from the middle of the country in the Midwest and Pennsylvania and everywhere else proved to be extremely adept boat builders, and they proved to be extremely adept sailors down the river, getting through the rapids and everything. I attributed this all to the skills that the farmers of the Midwest picked up during the great Flatboat Era. And this tantalized me because the great Flatboat Era, I'm a big reader of history, and if I hadn't heard about it, probably a lot of other people hadn't. And so I got to studying it, and it was attractive to me, mainly because of a penchant of mine, is the real history of the country. You know, what George Washington was really after to create an independent America. What the founders wanted, what they really sponsored, et cetera. The real relationship with the Indian tribes and so forth. That's not taught. That's not the history they teach us. They teach us, you know, the glory of the Declaration of Independence and everything, and the bumptiousness of the American spirit and everything. All things to promote a comfortable idea of America. But learning about flatboats, I said, well, since I didn't even know there was a flatboat era. So what happened was, after the American Revolution, I'm looking for this little pointer here, right up along the Monongahela River in Pittsburgh, that area, there was a streaming, and also down over the Cumberland Gap area here, there was a streaming, massive movement of people. They were Revolutionary War soldiers mainly, but others were just entrepreneurs and so forth, who had fought in the Revolution. They knew that a bankrupt America, just very devastated America at that time, would not be able to pay them for their service. Most of them had not been paid yet. But the government promised that the first time we convene an actual Congress, we're going to pass an act to give everybody who was a veteran in the Revolution a tract of land in the Ohio country. The Ohio country, Indiana country, is called the Northwest country at that point. And so there was a massive migration of Revolutionary War veterans, just people anxious for new land, people who wanted to trade. And they landed their flatboats. They built their flatboats mainly along the shores of the Monongahela and the Allegheny Rivers in Pittsburgh, which both drain into the Ohio. And it was a massive, as I began to read more and more and go back in economic histories that were written well before the present generation of historians, I realized this was the real frontier. This is where America was created. And so what happened in 1801 from Pittsburgh to New Orleans was about 2,000 tons of cargo came down in 40 to 60-foot flatboats made by the farmers themselves or the little boat yards to New Orleans, which was the fastest growing city in the world at that point as an export city, because the Midwest was now being flooded with pioneers and settlers, and all that product came downriver. By 1840, the bills of lading and cargo entries and everything that are still recorded, and you can find in New Orleans today, we're recording 200 million tons of cargo. In 40 years, the United States passed Great Britain and France together. They were the two big export powers of the day. By the time of the Civil War, the United States had surpassed Great Britain and France as an exporter, and we were actually had a gross domestic export higher than Europe. So this just fascinated me. And to give you one example of just one more number that tells you the story. So in the 1840s and 50s, those trails to the west that you see all the John Wayne movies about, et cetera, at the most, there were 400,000 people who crossed the western trails by covered wagon and oxen and mule in the 1850s. And that's, by the way, that's considering the 100,000 people who crossed in 1848 for that classic American issue of greed, because gold had been discovered in California. Okay. Between the Revolution and the Civil War, 3 million people took the Ohio to the Mississippi at Cairo, Illinois, down to New Orleans. So this was far more important. It created the American culture as we know it. It was a huge melting pot of ethnic groups and runaways from the European wars and so forth. Huge number of people, if anybody has a French surname, huge numbers of aristocrats were escaping the French Revolution and all its mayhem afterwards, building a little flatboat and coming down the river. So this was the real frontier. Everything that happened on the trails there was afterwards. And if I look weird, they've told me I have to stay facing forward, I guess because I'm on a recording or whatever. So I'm trying to point behind my back. But, yeah. So what happened was, I'm just going to play this video really quickly. And this is a video, sort of a promotional thing that Simon & Schuster made, just so you get a sense of what the boat looked like and what the trip was. I decided after doing all this research and realizing that that was the real frontier, not the trail years, which I just written about, wouldn't it be a sensible thing to build a flatboat? It's just a normal collapse into poor mental health that I go through every once in a while. Wouldn't it be a good idea to build a flatboat and take it down the river and see, not to reenact, but to see that river from the perspective of what the flatboat, using that flatboat as a observatory of what the pioneers saw, and writing about my experiences. And everyone told me, you're going to die. It's not going to make it. You can be run over by barges and everything. I'll talk about that in a second. But this video was made by my publisher, and I'll just let you look at it for a second, because it'll visually locate you what the boat looked like, what the river looked like, etc. So let me see if I can get started. I did the book basically for two reasons. First of all of us grew up with a conception of history that the pioneer period was horses, mules, oxen, and covered wagons crossing the plains. So it was a surprise to me when I learned that, in fact, the frontier really began 50 years before, right after the Revolution, and it was down the watersheds of the big inland rivers, the Ohio, Mississippi, and their tributaries. This fundamentally changed my conception of history, and so I wanted to build a flatboat and go those 2,000 miles from Elizabeth, PA to New Orleans, and use the trip as kind of a vessel that I could tell the history through. What surprised me the most was the diversity of the populations, the multiculturalism of America, that people think we've just invented that and we're just talking about it nowadays. Certain people on the far right, they just want to define America as a bunch of white guys, when we're being invaded. No, it was never just a bunch of white guys. It was a very big mix of native peoples and Europeans and so forth. I was also very surprised with how quickly a complicated economy burst on the rivers. The speed with which the American economy expanded during this period was extraordinary.
It's a feeling of great accomplishment because I started this trip not much of a boater.
New airplanes. I was a licensed pilot. I had been from a young age. And I knew horses and mules because I'd grown up with them. But I've never been a boatman. And so I had to teach myself a whole new set of skills. That was a very great lesson because I made the mistake of all amateurs, that I relied on the advice of people who said they knew what they were doing, and they didn't. We'd be going down the river, and all these people who were supposedly experts, they would tell us, you can't go through those whirlpools on the river because your boat will crash and you'll be sucked along the bottom and you won't even have your underwear on. And when you come back up, you better prepare your family. Things like that simply were not accurate. So that was the biggest thing I learned, which was that the skills I needed to get down the river resided within me already, but I had to draw them out by experience. That is significant because the flatboat experience, which created the American global economy, was undertaken by untrained, uneducated farmers. And they had to teach themselves going down the river. And they were completely inexperienced. It was teaching themselves to conquer fear.
All right, we're coming into the dock at Audubon Park in New Orleans. What a fitting ending to this glorious trip.
This boat, right after we built it, most of the, and no, I mean, people would ask me, I've given talks, was that up there? Was that some lady in, I forget where it was. It says, is that where you put the air conditioning unit? Yeah. So we built this based on a model of Caleb Bingham painting. He was the great recorder of the Flatboat Era. And this is what built America right there. Okay. The flat bottom boat. Okay. The flat bottom boat, as opposed to a V-hull, which pushes the water sideways, but pushes the hull down, which will draw 8, 10 feet, maybe 6 feet, maybe 4 feet, depending on the design. This flatboat of mine weighed 16,000 pounds. That's 8 tons. And by the time we had it all loaded up with everything, it was about 10 tons. And because of the flat bottom all the way across, it distributes water over such a broad area that it's displacing the water at a rate that can sustain a lot of weight without pushing it down with a great draft. This boat with 2 tons on it drew 18 inches. It was traditional classic flatboat design. So it drew 18 inches. And why was that important? The rivers in the days before they were improved by the Army Corps of Engineers were very unpredictable. The water would be very high one week, very low the next week. And often you'd be scraping along the bottom, but that boat with the flat bottom, only drawing less than 2 feet, could scrape and bump along the rocks and the sandbars and everything else. There were huge tree snags in the river, which we actually encountered ourselves. And you just plow right through them, you know, and you can look at the boat and the construction methods. It's pretty brutal, and it could take a lot of abuse. But it was the flatboat principle. That flat bottom boat right there, that's what created America and made us a global industrial exporter. That's just us lowering the boat into the water in the Elizabeth, PA, which was an old boat building town. We started to launch from there because they had a good boat launch, and it was the original place where flatboats were built along the Monongahela River in between Pennsylvania and West Virginia. That's Elizabeth. That's Elizabeth, PA, from where we launched the boat, and you can see now that it's up against the topography. The boat is so 46 foot long, but it's miniaturized, you know, by the its surroundings. And the reason I love this picture is that one of the big discoveries of the trip was how beautiful the Ohio River towns are and how many of them have been restored. And it's just so interesting to see, you know, Newburgh, Indiana, Lawrenceburg, et cetera, Marietta, just these exquisitely restored towns with a still active life, still a relationship to the river, which isn't so bad. Like in Brandenburg, Kentucky, it was just wonderful meeting an old guy who told me stories how he literally built his life on the river. First he caught fish and sold it. Then he worked his way through college on a tugboat. And then, you know, it just went on from there. And that old relationship to the river was very much still the same. Okay, this picture is interesting. Those are coal barges. I can't remember where on the Ohio River they are, but one of the things that happened on the trip was we had to conquer fear. We had to learn to edit fear because everyone going like, you're going to die. Like my brother Nick said, you know, you're going to die. You don't know how to tie knots. You're going to die. Or, you know, you're going to get in this whirlpool and it's not going to be so bad for you because the whirlpool is going to spin you around and you will lose consciousness before the boat capsizes. But prepare your family because you're going to come up after being scraped along the bottom. You won't even have your underwear on. So, you know, and so all these fears, I'll tell you about some other fears in a minute. And getting out on the river was realizing that most of these fears were totally irrational and totally inaccurate. One of the problems with people living along the river in some of these smaller towns where, you know, Louisville's modern advanced city, you've got people from all over the country here. But in many of these small towns, the same families have lived there forever, and they lost their houses in the 27 flood or the 37 flood. They've lost a lot of relatives in tugboat accidents. So, because everybody worked on the river. And so they live on the river. They can't even swim. They don't go to the river. They fish off the dock or whatever. So there's a lot of fear associated with it. And I'll tell you another story about that in a second. But these coal barges were very important for me because there was a lesson. Everyone said, the tugboats are going to run you over. They don't care about you. They're going to push you off to the side and you're going to die. So I had to invent my own way of dealing with the river. And actually, the biggest thing I learned on the trip is that a lack of knowledge is an asset. Know what you don't know, because when I came to a spot where things were tricky, I had to figure it out by common sense, not by what the experts had told me. So this picture is there because I learned that the coal barges in the foreground, which are unloaded, only draw 3 feet. The coal barges further back behind me were loaded, and they draw 9 feet. Okay, so if I was coming along, and in this picture, what you don't see is there's a bunch of tugs right behind me, all just kind of wedging me in. If I stayed as close to those barge cells as I could, just went right down the edge of those barges, I'm only drawing 18 inches to 2 feet. Even an empty barge is drawing 3 feet. If I just hug them all the way down the river till the tugboats are passed, I'd be safe. And so that's what I did. And one of the things that happened on the river is, you know, these tugboat captains, people warn me, the tugboat captains don't want you there. They're going to run you off the river. The rivers run for the benefit of the tug and barge companies, blah, blah, blah. So we'd be going down the river and I'd hear this pilot pushing 40 barges or something behind me going like, well, because they're always broadcasting what's going on, what to expect if you come around, because there's always another tug coming upriver, you know. So, and these guys, yeah, had a way of talking, you know, you can hardly understand. Just, well, she's down along near a pirate ship, wooden boat with a big American flag. I don't know what the hell they're doing on the river with it, you know, I don't know. He's like, kind of looks like he's singing to the barge cells. Maybe he's all right. In a few months from then, after we had all this experience dealing with tugboat captains, and even a couple of incidents where I broadcast to the captain that there was a boat adrift in the middle of the channel and kept him aware of where it was so he wouldn't hit it with his barges, because he can't see much ahead of him. He's got half mile of barges ahead of him. Then it changed, you know. Is that the flatboat Patience up there? You guys are right. He got that guys that boat with the wooden boat with American flag. Oh, I'm on their Facebook page right now, but they're right on the river ahead of me, and them guys is good. You know, they're nice. Yeah. So the atmosphere changed quite a bit. This just gives you an example, and if you look over my shoulder, over my right shoulder in the picture, you can see those tugs ahead. With those barges behind me. They don't look like they're any threat right now, but you got to know where they're going to go on the river. They may decide to cross the river so they can hit the next bend in the right spot. You have to figure that out. You have to listen to the radio traffic and do that. But it gives you a nice sense of what it was like being on the river. This was going through the locks, and going through the locks was complicated a little bit, but it began to be fun. But in this particular case, there was a tugboat with barges behind me pushing in. But the harbor master told me to stop right there. And I said to the harbor master, is this guy going to stop? Because all I can see is these barges coming. And if he hit me, he wouldn't even know if he hit me. And I said, is this guy going to stop? You know, you sure you want me to wait here? And then I hear from behind me, the captain broadcasting, don't worry up there. I ain't going to hit your ass. You know. So, you know, you just learn. This is a nice shot. This is along the Ohio. What I love to, whoops. Well, look at this. Okay. What I loved along the Ohio was the bluffs, the Sandstone Bluffs are just beautiful at night when the sun bathes down on them. They turn pink and purple, and yeah, these guys go down the river. You know, how do they do it? This thing has come apart on me, but I think we'll be all right. And this is just a spot along the Ohio. I forget where, and we had all our chairs out because somebody said they were going to bring us some lasagna. They saw us on the river. They said, bring us some lasagna, so we put our chairs out so we could eat out on the dock. This was the secret. Everyone said you're going to run out of gas and you're going to be adrift. And then you're going to die because the tugboat's going to run over you. So I bought an electric bike, and there's 500 miles between marinas. on sections of the Ohio and the Mississippi, 500 miles. And they said, you're going to die. You're not going to be able to get gas. You're going to, yeah. So I bought an electric bike. I didn't plan the trip that well. I did just, let's get an electric bike, see what happens. And it was great because down in Mississippi, you'd be riding on these dark, spooky roads, with Spanish moss hanging from the trees and bats flying by and everything. And I don't know where I am. I have river maps. I don't have road maps, but I would just steer on the electric bike with all my gas tanks on for this orange glow in the sky. It was everywhere. Just steer for the orange glow. And I got there and I learned it was the Dairy Queen. It was a local Dairy Queen, and you got to the Dairy Queen, the kids were really helpful, and there's always a gas station nearby, and the kids are all there with their cups and everything, and they go, hey, we'll drive you back to the river. You don't have to just put that thing in the back. We'll take you back to the river. So there was an adventure about every part of it. That's just a nice shot. One of the big surprises of the trip was how much land is protected along the Ohio. Huge national forest all the way down to Cairo, Illinois, and gorgeous, like the gorge behind me. And the sun would come up in the morning. It was just a beautiful, very romantic experience. This shows you how close the traffic was. Okay, so there's, whoops. Oh, I'm doing it again. Oh, well. Yeah, this just shows you how close the traffic was. This is a big coal barge. And this is one tug here. And that's another tug there. And there were two others over here. So you really had to be careful and talk to the captains and understand what they're doing and make them feel like you had them in mind to get down the river. Because if they became your enemies, you'd be really in trouble. They'd report you to the Coast Guard, etc. Okay, this is just the coal is dying. We all know the coal is dying. We've all read about it, but this is just the amount of coal on the river. And this was, I could say a few other things about this picture, but this was all coal loaded for that power plant way in the background there. This just gives my friend Danny, who's a big character in the book, and I described him stuff. He wanted to show how big the river was and how small the boat was. And he stopped at a bridge and then hitchhiked back down to get back on the boat, just to take a picture of what the flatboat patients look like on the Ohio River. And I'm sorry, I can't tell you where that is. I wish I knew. I could get Danny to give me a geotag on it, but now this one's fun. This was typical of the romance on the trip. So this is, does anybody know where this is? This is Fat Boy's Floating Grill and Saloon. Does anybody, I think, pardon me? New Richmond, okay. But there really is a Fat Boy. I mean, and so we went in there and I figured, well, there's very few pleasure boats on the Ohio except around big cities and stuff because people are afraid to go on the river because of the tugboats. So what happened there, we pulled up to the dock and ate, and no other boats came, but people drove in and parked in the parking lot up there and walked down to Fat Boy's. And Fat Boy was really great, and he's making us these po' boys and all this stuff to eat. And then after we had lunch, I said, all right, guys, let's get back on the boat. And we studied the maps a little and said, we got to move on here. And Fat Boy said, no, come on, stay all afternoon, have a good time. You can enjoy town, you can enjoy things in town. There's a couple haunted houses, and all that stuff. So everybody's nuts about haunted houses today. I don't know what it is. And I said, no, we gotta move on. I gotta make miles today. He said, look, and the special tonight is a pot roast special, and we'll feed you with that. And he said, and I'll tell you one other thing if you stay for the afternoon. I go, what? He goes, free gin and tonics for your whole crew, And all the crew guys go, I'm not the captain now. They just say, they go, deal, we're doing it. Can we start drinking them now? And that was the hospitality of people along the trip was great. This is just a picture of I had a rule I would steer the boat and make sure we were clear of the barge traffic and steering exactly where we told the captains we'd be. And then Cynthia and Deb on the right, who were part of my crew, and they were really good, did really great job, both experienced on the river. Always knew where we were, every mile marker and every landmark on the river we had to identify and be. I always wanted to know if a tugboat called me and I said I was at, mile 96, I wanted to be at 96 so that they could rely on you. This is in Tiptonville, Tennessee. And this particular night, we parked there at the town landing and just had a nice romantic night. And the tugboat there was full of the barges up to my left. Said, "What are you guys doing?" The captain called over on the radio. Said, "What are you guys doing over there?" I said, "We're drinking gin and tonics." He goes, well, if you bring some of that over for us, we'll feed you, And it turns out these guys are out for 30 days on, 30 days off. The most important crew member, and the captain will tell you that, is the chef on the boat. So we went over the tugboat, sat down in this little room they have where you can eat. And it was really great to see the tugboat and share life a little bit with the crew. This is just an example. I'm going to try and keep it quick so we can get to questions of how much traffic there was on the river. And just look at this for a second. You see that brown area there? I can't go there. I can't go this area, Shoaly. And I somehow had to talk to these captains and figure out where to go. And this is on the Mississippi, which is much faster. And you can't stop because the current is so fast behind you. So I had to talk to the captains and one thing or another. And, they tell me what they saw on the radar and get me through the bend. That's my friend Danny. This is on the lower Mississippi below Baton Rouge. And there you have, and there were 10 or 12 of these around us. The lower Mississippi below the Baton Rouge is actually a maritime seaway. It's a navigable seaway. And these Panamax boats, 900 feet long, are coming through, loading up with American cargo for overseas market. And you better stay out of their way. And this is George Caleb Bingham's The Jelly Boatman, famous painting. It hangs in the National Art Gallery now. And this was kind of the design that I based our boat on. And I'm pretty sure, yeah. And I'll just tell you one last story about fear. So it was a journey about fear, about editing fear, learning what fear is. So when we came through this area, along southern Indiana and southern Ohio, and a lot of you people, everybody in this room knows who they are. You can tell by the number of Trump lawn signs, what the politics of these people are. And it's a surprise because you think you're in Indiana. No, southern Indiana, you're in the South, So every night when we pulled in somewhere, we pulled into a town landing or tie off a tree or whatever, but it attracted a lot of attention. And everybody wanted to come down and see the boat and sit on the boat, have a beer or whatever. We had a nice time. We learned a lot about the country. And the thing in southern Ohio and southern Indiana was these deputy sheriffs would be off duty, but they had to come down and see the boat. And after a beer or two, it would get around to the subject of, it always came up. I said, "Here comes a question." He goes, "Now, what are you boys carrying for weapons? I mean, what kind of weapons you got?" And I go, "Well, sir, we don't carry weapons. We just don't believe we just, I don't know how to use them. It's not, I'm not on the river to do, The look of fear and frustration and confusion on the face of a deputy sheriff from southern Ohio when you told him, "You're not carrying, like, look, I'll go home. I'll get you some weapons. I got extras at home. I'll bring more. You can have them." And I said, "Well, why do we need weapons?" Why? He said, "Oh man, you're going down the river. You're going to get to Cincinnati. You're going to get to Louisville. You're going to get to Paducah, all them towns. And them kids are come out from the projects. Kids from the projects are a euphemism. You know, they're gonna come streaming down the streets, across the water bank, onto your boat, burn your boat, and kill you. So anyway, we got away from these guys somehow, but as we went downriver, what was fascinating when we got to all these cities, because a lot of times we might buy gas there, or we might stop because we could see like a supermarket sign or something. But it is true that in a lot of these cities, the urban area where, you know, a lot of minorities live, it's right there on the river. These kids came down. They could not have been better Americans than anybody else we met on the trip. They said, hey man, you know, we'll run for water. You know, we got plenty of pot if you want to buy that. You know, this and that. And they were just the nicest kids in the world, wonderful. And the last thing that I needed to fear from them was my own safety. You know, so those deputy sheriffs upriver were kind of. So then we get down to Baton Rouge, and there's a beautiful gravel bar. And Baton Rouge is interesting because the Mississippi separates Old Town, which is very swank and exclusive, and then the other side of the river is mostly a minority community and the projects and stuff like that. And these kids get up early in the morning, and it's a beautiful river tradition that made me feel like nothing had changed on the river for 200 years. These black kids come up, you know, they walk down the river to Lookout Point. They fish all day. They go in the shade and they clean the fish and everything. They wrap it up in this white paper and everything. Then they take it out to the highway. They wait until 4 or 5 o'clock. They take it out to the highway when the rush hour traffic is building and sell the fish to the guys. And there are people there just like, you know, oh, glad you're here today, you know, and buy the fish. So these kids came by and they said, we're going fishing. We'll bring you some fish back for dinner, all right? I go, yeah. I said, but you got to come on board the boat and eat it. You know, eat it with us. We'll cook it up and make a nice meal out of it. The kids go, all right, we'll go up to the highway, sell our fish, and then we'll come back. We'll bring you enough, don't worry. So they brought back this really nice catfish and stuff like that. We sat there for a couple hours with them. It was really fun meeting these kids and everything. And finally, this one kid was calling me Captain Buck. And we were nice and relaxed and having a good time. He goes, now, Captain Buck, can I just ask you a question? I go, yeah. He goes, what are you carrying for fajitas? And I go, you know, and you know, how cool am I? I'm not very much. I go, well, I don't know. We're sailing down the Mississippi in the middle of the summer. We haven't found that we need heaters, you know. And the kid goes, man, you might be the stupidest white guy I've ever met. So I said, well, by the way, why would we need guns, you know, ammunition, stuff like that? He goes, you're still the dumbest white guy I've ever met, you know. And I go, well, why? What's the fear? What's the problem? He goes, man, you're about 50 miles upriver from Cajun country. And when you get down there to them Cajuns, not only can you not understand what they're talking about, they don't want you to understand what they're talking about, because as soon as they see your boat, they're going to come charging out of the swamps, down across the waterfront, onto your boat, burn your boat, and kill you, you know. And I go, well, you know, at least the races agree about something down here, you know. And it was just one of the biggest revelations of the trip, what I learned about the country, and I write about it in the book, which is here you got deputy sheriffs 1,000 miles upriver thinking I need weapons because the black kids in the ghettos are going to come down and burn my boat and shoot me. And then 1,000 miles away, the kids in Baton Rouge thinking, as soon as I get to Cajun country, them white guys is going to, you know, and you know, you won't be able to understand their language, and they want it that way because they're going to kill you. So two groups in very different parts of the country, very far away, were operating on fear, you know, and that's not fact, not information, not really, they never even seen each other, but that's what the country runs on now. So I think I got through this quick enough. not quite quick enough, but I promised I'd leave time for questions. And are we doing all right? You were good? He's got a microphone for questions on either side, if people have a question.
So just thank you very much, Rinker. Fascinating talk. If you have a question, yeah, you come up to either mic and ask it, and then I'll monitor if we have things from online.
No, thank you.
I've been on a small boat on the Tom Bigby
Mm-hmm.
when a tugboat pushing some barges come by and turn placid water into large waves. Did you see that same thing on a big river like the Mississippi or the Ohio?
I studied it, made a study of it. Because people said if you run aground on the Mississippi, you'll never get off that sandbar. And your trip will be over. The Coast Guard will come and confiscate your boat and tow it away. And you may as well just take all your stuff out and walk to the closest highway and hitchhike home. So sure enough, I'm coming around the bend near Osceola, Arkansas. And it was a very difficult bend on the Mississippi. And I see the beginnings of a barge, 45 string barge. All I can see is the front bows. The tugboat's still way behind me. He can't even see me yet. And I look at him, spent about a minute or two, and I realize he's going to come right for this buoy, right? He's going to come right for where I am. And there's no way I can beat him back to the middle of the river. The only solution I had was I'm going to run aground on this. There's a huge sandbar right there. Have to run aground and get up there. And I actually backed up and, jumped up, did some sand hopping, they call it, and got way up on the bar. And finally, when the captain came around, and I knew I was safe, I was very comfortable. My crew was very upset. I said, relax, we're fine. Because I'd looked at those wakes. And the captain came around the bend and I said, flatboat patience is aground. He goes, I saw you on the radar. Did you run off this river to get out of my way? I said, yeah, I had to. He goes. And I said, but I think when you come by me, if you just give me plenty of power, you give me your wake, I need your wake to get off this sandbar. And he goes, and you're going to get it, That boat came up and fortunately it was a straightaway behind me. So he could maneuver however he needed. And he came up and I saw him practicing on the way up, look at the wake. He's crazy. He got opposite us and he said, don't go until I tell you to, because I don't want you to hit me, but I'm going to give you some water, and he just turned the stern into us, went to full power. These things are 9,000 horsepower, went to full power. And I said, okay, we're going to go up the bar. He says, you're off the bar, and we were floating. I just steered off the bar. So, and that was another fear, fear. You're going to die because you're going to be stuck on a sandbar. I wasn't stuck for 5 minutes, But yes, they make a huge wake and you have to learn how to navigate around them. Anyone else?
We have an online question. They said this might be difficult to answer, but do you have a single most memorable experience or memory from your trip?
I think it was about my mother. I had just taken care of my mother up in Maine for a couple of years in her later years. And we would go out during the day and I'd take her up and see the lupines along the Damascotta River in Maine. Lupines in Maine. I think most people know what lupines are, but in the state of Maine, they grow wild and the whole universe is covered. It's like a Van Gogh landscape. And we came around the corner one day along the Ohio. It's that section not far below here, I think, where there's a lot of sand pits, a lot of sand mining. And it was just an explosion of purple and lavender wildflowers. I looked up the wildflowers and they're in the book. I say which ones they were, but, and it just suddenly thought about my mother and, you know, I'd had such a great time with her before she died. And I was along the rivers of Maine with her. And here I come across the Ohio, down the Ohio, and there's this scene that just reminded me of that day sitting in the car with my mom. I mean, there's a lot of other memories. I mean, you know, learning to, you know, I broke my ribs a couple times and learning that Tylenol washed down with really good 100 proof bourbon works as a medication. It really works. I was never worried about breaking my ribs again. And I have broken them since then because I know I got the solution. So there were a lot of great moments.
Any other questions?
Excuse me? Oh,
Ma'am, did you have a question?
Well, we knew that you had the gasoline engine and the radio. Did you have any other modern technology with you?
I used a little bit, there is a program that you can put in your iPad that with GPS and everything follows you along the river and tells you pretty much where you're at. But I used it mainly because it gave us the sailing line, and the sailing line is the best place to be on the river where you won't run aground, where there's deep water. And it was useful to have the sailing line because I knew what the tugboats would want to do. But I did, and there were other things about the modern technology that was useful, but I still had all the old printed maps from the Army Corps of Engineers, and I used them religiously because they're much more detailed than the digital maps, much more detailed than if it said, you know, Coleman coal docks, you know, you look over and there it was, you know, and you really need those waypoints, and people think they're sailing down the river and whatever, you just have to stay on the river. No, you really have to know where you are at all times. So I did have some technology, but I found the old technology, the old systems better. And yeah, so yeah.
Final question I'll ask, what's your next adventure?
Well, I'm not exactly talking about it yet because, you know, I go places and, you know, some really delightful creature comes up to you and says, you know, well, I'm a writer too, you know, I have a writer's group, you know, and I said, oh, I've been working for 7 years about a novel, you know, living in suburban Louisville, you know, and I said, well, what are you doing for a living in between? Oh, I sell real estate, you know, and so I don't talk about my books ahead of time, but I've got a really nice topic. It's an unusual thing. It's not another adventure. It's a different kind of adventure. So, please, she's been dying for a question. Yeah.
So I know you were inspired by the Shanty Boat journey that
Mhm.
Anna and Harlan Hubbard took down the Ohio and Mississippi. And I wondered after your trip, what kind of perspective or insight that gave you about them and some of your thoughts about their
Yeah.
journey.
Well, the thing about Harlan Hubbard's Shanty Boat is, and I've been out there once already, and I'm going out again tomorrow. And I just think he's an incredible artist and writer, and it bothers me that he's not better known by the rest of America. But the thing about Harlan Hubbard's book Shanty Boat was, we got to the Wabash, and there's a little town, I think it's called Uniontown, Kentucky, right above where the Wabash comes in. And you know, fisherman comes over, you know, you're gonna die, you know. I said, tell me why I've been dead so many times now. It's not gonna bother me to hear again. You know, you're gonna get to the Wabash. The Wabash is running full of the very record rains up in Indianapolis so far. And the water was pouring down the White River in the Wabash, and it's gonna push me into the Wabash Island, and I'm gonna die. And the thing was, I explained in the book, Wabash is my favorite river. And even though I'm from the East Coast, I've been spending a lot of time on the Wabash my whole life. And I then remembered from reading Harlan Hubbard that he came down Wabash and he had the same experience. And Harlan, you're dead, you know. And he and his wife had quite a day getting down past the confluence of the Wabash and around. And they finally stopped the boat by steering it into a grove of trees. And it worked. It was fine. And I figured, and so I remembered Hubbard's experience from reading his book, and I figured I was gonna crab across the mouth of the Wabash, and I actually pointed northwest into Illinois. Indiana's on one side, Illinois is on the other. I pointed into Illinois as if I was heading northwest, but the current was so strong it just pushed me exactly where I wanted to go, back onto the Ohio. So I think what Hubbard did, which is what the appreciation was, is he gave me the inspiration. You know, he had the same experience. He's just left. You know, he didn't plan it. He didn't do anything. You know, if I need food, I'll just plant some potatoes along the way or something. And he did. It took him 7 years. It's the most romantic journey I've ever heard about. And so I learned specific things from him, but I think the most I learned from him was just do it, and that he inspired me to just, if you get out there and try it. And I would repeat again, and Hubbard is really good on this subject. Respect what you don't know, understand what you don't know, because it gives you a big empty cloud of knowledge up there that you make up yourself, you know. And after 3 or 4 of these experiences, especially after I had a couple times where, you know, instead of being in the way of the tugboats, I was giving them information that they were glad to get. It just became a self-confidence, and you know, and I think that's what Hubbard was all about, because what he was doing in his day, in the 1950s and 60s, saying, forget conformity, forget society, you know, forget security, forget Levittown, you know, whatever. I'm just going to live on the river, and, you know, if I want to saw a tree down, I use an old handsaw, you know. And he would plow his garden up every year with a little stupid little hand plow or a shovel. And somebody come down one time and gave him a gravelly, you know, what are they called? Whatever, something with the motor. And Harlan Hubbard goes off on this great screed, you know. It's like, there's nothing more ugly in America than something with a Briggs and Stratton engine on it, you know. And so, yeah, I think it was more, not so much the specifics, but the inspiration. And yeah, all of you, this thing that's going on downriver where they're going to restore Harlan Hubbard's house and everything at Payne Hollow. I don't know, David, is it going to be next summer? Things will be ready, or? Yeah, so I think by next summer, but it is a great reason to be in Louisville. You would really want to go down and see Harlan Hubbard's house. Read all his books first, but he's a very significant guy and very significant artist. And being on the place where all that was created is really quite moving. Yeah. So
There are books up here for sale, and I'm sure Rinker will be happy to autograph them. Thank you very much, Rinker, for a wonderful talk.